They told you the Earl of Essex was executed for treason. But what if the real reason was something far more personal? In 1599, Essex burst into Elizabeth's bedroom unannounced and saw something that sealed his fate. Within 17 months, his head was on a chopping block. What did he see that morning that the Queen could never forgive? Stick around because the answer reveals the secret Elizabeth spent 40 years hiding. October 10, 1562, Hampton Court Palace. A scream echoes through the corridors that makes every servant freeze in terror. Queen Elizabeth I has collapsed during a walk in the gardens, burning with fever so intense her ladies can barely touch her skin. Within hours, the diagnosis comes back, and it's the one thing that terrifies Tudor England more than war or famine: smallpox. The most feared disease of the era, a killer that shows no mercy to rich or poor, peasant or queen. For a 29-year-old monarch with no heir and a kingdom balanced on the edge of religious civil war, this isn't just a medical crisis. It's a political catastrophe waiting to explode. Her counselors immediately begin preparing for the worst, secretly discussing who would take the throne when she dies, because in 1562, when you got smallpox, death was more likely than survival. 1 in 3 victims didn't make it. And for those who did survive, the disease left marks that would change their lives forever. Elizabeth's ladies rush her to her bedchamber, stripping away her elaborate gowns as the fever climbs higher. She's delirious, calling out for her father, Henry VIII, begging him not to send her to the Tower. The physicians arrive with their medieval treatments that are more torture than medicine. They wrap Elizabeth's entire body in red cloth because Tudor medicine genuinely believed that red fabric would prevent scarring. The logic was insane, based on nothing but superstition. But when you're dying, you'll try anything. They cover her windows with red curtains, place red blankets over her bed, even dress her attendants in red robes. The Queen of England lies in a crimson cocoon, her body erupting in pustules that cover every inch of her skin. Her face swells until she's barely recognizable. The sores appear in her mouth, her throat, making it agony to swallow even water. Her famous red gold hair begins falling out in clumps as the fever rages for days. Outside her chamber, the Privy Council meets in emergency session, debating succession while the Queen fights for her life. William Cecil, her most trusted advisor, sends urgent letters to every corner of England, preparing the nobility for what seems inevitable. The Spanish ambassador writes coded dispatches to King Philip II, telling him to prepare for chaos in England because the Protestant Queen is dying, and the Catholic faction will seize this moment. For 6 days, Elizabeth hovers between life and death while her kingdom holds its breath. Then, on the 7th day, the fever breaks. She survives. Against the odds, against the statistics, against the expectations of every physician in England, Elizabeth I lives through smallpox. The court erupts in celebrations. Church bells ring across London, and bonfires light up the night sky in thanksgiving for the Queen's miraculous recovery. But as the initial relief fades and Elizabeth begins to recover enough to look at herself in a mirror, she discovers the terrible price of survival. The disease has left its mark in ways that will haunt her for the next 40 years. Her face, once praised by ambassadors as uncommonly beautiful, now bears the scars of pox. More devastating still, her hair, that glorious Tudor red gold that was her vanity and her signature, has been ravaged. Large patches have fallen out completely, and what remains is thin, damaged, and breaking. For a queen whose power rested partly on her image, who understood better than anyone that monarchy is theater, and appearance is everything? This is a catastrophe of a different kind. The smallpox didn't kill her body, but it destroyed the face she showed to the world. And that's when Elizabeth made a decision that would define the rest of her reign. She would create a new face, an artificial one, and nobody would ever see the real Elizabeth again. What happens when a 29-year-old queen, famous for her vanity and obsessed with her public image, suddenly finds herself scarred and balding? Elizabeth I didn't accept it. She couldn't accept it. In an era where a monarch's physical appearance was inseparable from their authority, where weakness or disfigurement could be interpreted as God's judgment, looking damaged was politically dangerous. She had already spent years fighting to be taken seriously as a female ruler in a world that believed women were inherently unfit to govern. She'd survived plots, assassination attempts, and constant pressure to marry and surrender her power to a husband. Her appearance had been one of her weapons, her youth and beauty something she wielded in diplomatic negotiations and court politics. Now that weapon was gone, stripped away by a disease that left her looking older, scarred, and according to the brutal standards of Tudor beauty, ruined. So Elizabeth turned to a substance that would become both her salvation and her slow poison: Venetian ceruse, a mixture of white lead and vinegar that created a thick, paste-like substance that could be spread across the face like plaster. When it dried, it formed a flawless white mask that covered every scar, every pockmark, every imperfection. Venetian ceruse was the most expensive and sought-after cosmetic in Europe, imported from Venice at enormous cost and used by wealthy women who wanted to achieve the pale, porcelain complexion that Tudor beauty standards demanded. But here's what those women didn't fully understand or chose to ignore. The main ingredient was lead. Toxic, poisonous lead that was slowly absorbed through the skin every single day it was worn. The cosmetic would eventually cause the very problems it was meant to hide. Lead poisoning leads to skin deterioration, hair loss, tooth decay, and neurological damage. But for Elizabeth, there was no choice. She needed the mask. She began applying Venetian ceruse every single morning in an elaborate ritual that took hours. Her ladies would spread the thick white paste across her entire face, her neck, her décolletage, creating a surface so smooth and white it looked almost otherworldly. Then came the rouge for her cheeks, made from a mixture of plant dyes and, ironically, more toxic substances. Her lips were painted a deep red. Her eyebrows, which had also thinned from the smallpox, were darkened with kohl. By the time she was finished, Elizabeth looked like a living statue, a porcelain doll version of herself. The effect was striking, dramatic, and completely artificial. Foreign ambassadors who saw her described her appearance as startling and unnatural. But here's the cruel irony that sealed Elizabeth's fate. The very makeup she was using to hide the damage from smallpox was causing even more damage with every application. Lead is a cumulative poison. It builds up in the body over time, and there's no safe level of exposure. Every day Elizabeth wore that white mask, more lead seeped through her skin into her bloodstream. The lead poisoning accelerated her hair loss, making the very problem she was trying to hide even worse. It destroyed her skin, creating lesions and irritation that required even thicker applications of makeup to cover. It damaged her teeth until they turned black and began falling out, a problem she tried to hide by keeping her mouth closed or covering it with her hand when she smiled. It affected her mood, causing the violent temper tantrums that became more frequent as she aged. And worst of all, the makeup would eventually eat through her skin so thoroughly that by the end of her life, witnesses said her face looked like it was melting off her skull. But in 1562, fresh from her smallpox recovery, Elizabeth didn't know or didn't care about the long-term consequences. All she knew was that the white mask worked. It hid the scars. It created an image of flawless, ageless beauty that helped maintain her authority. And as her hair continued to thin and fall out, she would need more than makeup to maintain the illusion. She would need to engineer an entirely new appearance from the ground up. Picture this. By the 1570s, Elizabeth I has transformed herself into something that barely resembles a natural human being. The process starts before dawn every single day. Her most trusted ladies enter her bedchamber while it's still dark outside because Elizabeth has decreed that no one, absolutely no one, can see her without her costume. What happens in that room is a carefully guarded secret known only to a handful of women who have served her for decades and who understand that their lives depend on their silence. First comes the wig. Not a simple hairpiece or a modest covering, but an architectural marvel of red gold curls constructed on a wire frame that adds nearly a foot to her height. These wigs are made from real human hair, purchased at enormous expense and styled to recreate the Tudor red gold that Elizabeth was born with but lost decades ago. As she ages, the wigs become more elaborate, more towering, more decorated with jewels and pearls and gold thread until they weigh several pounds and require pins driven into padding on her head to stay secure. The construction is so complex it takes two ladies working together over an hour just to position and secure the wig properly. Then comes the face. The Venetian ceruse is applied in layers, each one smoothed and blended until her skin looks like white marble. The clothing Elizabeth chooses is equally calculated to conceal and create an artificial silhouette. She wears the highest collars in England, massive ruffs that extend out from her neck like starched halos, some measuring over a foot in diameter. These ruffs serve a dual purpose. They frame her face, drawing the eye to the white mask and away from anything else, and they physically prevent anyone from getting close enough to see the texture of her skin, or notice where the makeup ends and the damaged flesh begins. Her bodices are structured with whalebone stays that create a perfectly smooth, conical shape from her chest to her waist. This isn't about fashion or beauty, it's about control. The rigid stays eliminate any hint of her natural body shape, creating instead a geometric, almost inhuman form that looks the same whether she's 30 or 60. Her gowns are stiffened with buckram and canvas, standing away from her body in elaborate bell shapes that make it impossible to determine what's underneath. She wears sleeves that extend past her wrists, gloves that cover her hands completely, and skirts so heavy and structured they move like armor. Every visible inch of Elizabeth is covered, constructed, artificial. Foreign ambassadors write confused letters home describing a queen who looks more like an elaborate religious icon than a flesh-and-blood woman. But all of this elaborate construction required absolute control over who saw Elizabeth without her costume, and she enforced that control with terrifying ruthlessness. Only her innermost circle of ladies were permitted to see her during the morning preparation. These women had served her for decades, had proven their loyalty beyond question, and understood that breaking silence about what they witnessed would mean immediate imprisonment, or worse. Elizabeth limited her physicians to a tiny group who had treated her since before she became queen. These doctors signed documents swearing never to discuss her medical condition with anyone, not colleagues, not family, not even other members of the court. The penalty for violating that oath was treason. When foreign ambassadors visited, they saw only the finished product. The meetings were staged with military precision, with Elizabeth positioned in specific chairs, at specific angles, with specific lighting that would show her to best advantage. If she felt ill or if her makeup wasn't perfect that day, audiences were simply canceled without explanation. Nobles could wait for weeks for a meeting that kept being postponed because the queen decided the lighting wasn't right. This level of control created an atmosphere of mystery around Elizabeth that actually enhanced her power. Nobody knew what she really looked like. The woman on the throne seemed ageless, unchanging, almost supernatural. But maintaining that illusion required constant vigilance and occasionally eliminating people who saw too much. In 1566, Elizabeth fell seriously ill with what her doctors feared might be a recurrence of smallpox. For days she burned with fever while her council once again prepared for succession crisis. The illness was so severe that everyone believed she was dying. Her doctors begged for permission to conduct a thorough physical examination, something Elizabeth had forbidden for years. But the political situation was desperate. If she died without naming an heir, England would descend into civil war. Catholic nobles were already gathering forces to support Mary Queen of Scots' claim to the throne. Protestant factions were divided over who they would back. The kingdom was hours away from chaos. Finally, with her council threatening to break down her door and force an examination, Elizabeth granted permission for her personal physician, Dr. Hewick, to examine her completely. Dr. Hewick was 63 years old, a respected physician who had served the Tudor family for over 30 years. He had treated Elizabeth since she was a princess, had attended her through the smallpox, and was considered absolutely trustworthy. He entered her bedchamber alone, and what happened next has haunted historians ever since. The examination lasted nearly an hour. When Dr. Hewick finally emerged, witnesses recorded that his face had gone completely pale, drained of color. Dr. Hewick looked troubled in a way that went beyond medical concern. His hands were shaking. He refused to make eye contact with the other doctors waiting outside, and when they pressed him for details about the Queen's condition, he gave only the most minimal responses. He prescribed treatment, insisted she would recover, but wouldn't discuss what he'd discovered during the examination. This was completely out of character for a physician known for his detailed medical consultations and teaching. Something he saw in that room shook him so profoundly that he couldn't speak about it, even to trusted professional colleagues. After that examination, Dr. Hook underwent a personality transformation that everyone at court noticed. He withdrew from social functions, stopped attending the medical lectures where he'd previously been a popular speaker, and avoided conversations with other physicians. When colleagues tried to consult with him about the Queen's ongoing health, asking professional questions that would normally prompt detailed discussions, he would change the subject abruptly or simply walk away without explanation. He stopped keeping the detailed medical journals that had been his habit for decades. Whatever notes he might have written about that examination were never found. 1 year later, in 1567, Dr. Hewick died suddenly. The death registry listed the cause as sudden fever, that conveniently vague diagnosis that explained nothing and ended all inquiry. He was 64 years old, not elderly by the standards of physicians who often practiced into their 70s, and had shown no signs of declining health before his death. His personal papers and medical records, which should have been archived with other royal physicians' documents, disappeared completely. If he had written anything about what he observed during that 1566 examination, anything that might explain his shocked reaction, it vanished without a trace. This pattern would repeat throughout Elizabeth's reign. People who got too close, who saw too much, who might have understood what she was hiding, either died mysteriously or disappeared from court under suspicious circumstances. The 3 physicians who attended her final illness in 1603 all died within a year of her death. Servants present during her body's preparation were immediately scattered across England to remote estates with generous pensions and terrifying threats about what would happen if they ever spoke. High-ranking nobles who demanded access to witness her death were turned away by armed guards with explicit orders from the Privy Council. The level of secrecy, the desperate measures to control information, the convenient deaths of potential witnesses all pointed to a conspiracy of silence protecting something that could have destroyed the English monarchy if it became public. But what could possibly be so dangerous that it required this level of cover-up? The answer might lie in what foreign ambassadors kept reporting about Elizabeth's appearance. Observations that went far beyond mere vanity or aging. September 28, 1599. Nonsuch Palace in Surrey. The sun has barely risen when a rider appears on the horizon, his horse lathered with sweat and foam from being pushed to its absolute limit. This isn't a casual visitor or a scheduled arrival. This is a man riding like his life depends on reaching the palace before anyone can stop him. Robert Devereux, the 2nd Earl of Essex, has just committed what amounts to desertion. He was supposed to be in Ireland commanding Elizabeth's army against rebellious lords, but he's abandoned his post and ridden non-stop for days, covering over 300 miles without proper rest, driven by panic and desperation. Essex is the Queen's favorite, a position he's held for nearly a decade, but he knows he's in serious trouble. His military campaign in Ireland has been a disaster. He was sent with the largest English army ever assembled to crush a rebellion, but instead he's negotiated an unauthorized truce and achieved nothing. His enemies at court, led by Robert Cecil, have been sending letters to Elizabeth poisoning her against him, describing his failures in excruciating detail. Essex knows that if Cecil controls the narrative before he can explain himself personally, he's finished. His offices will be stripped, his reputation destroyed, possibly his head separated from his shoulders. So Essex has taken the desperate gamble of racing back to England without permission, planning to throw himself on Elizabeth's mercy and explain everything before his enemies can destroy him completely. He reaches Nonsuch Palace at 10 a.m., covered in mud and filth from days of hard riding, his clothes stained with horse sweat, his face unshaven, his hair wild. The palace guards recognize him immediately, the Earl of Essex, the Queen's favorite, bursting through the gates like a madman. He doesn't stop to clean himself, doesn't pause to request an audience through proper channels, doesn't follow any of the elaborate protocol that governs access to the monarch. He storms through the entrance, his boots tracking mud across pristine floors. Servants scatter in confusion. He pushes through the presence chamber where nobles are waiting for audiences, ignoring their shocked stares. He barges through the privy chamber where officials try to stop him, but can't quite bring themselves to physically restrain the Earl of Essex. The guards at the final door to Elizabeth's private apartments start to move to block him, but they're too slow, too uncertain about whether they should actually prevent the Queen's favorite from entering. And then Essex crashes through the door into Elizabeth I's bedchamber completely unannounced, without permission, at 10 o'clock in the morning. He freezes. The sight that greets Robert Devereux in that moment will haunt him for the rest of his very short life. There, standing by her dressing table in only a simple robe over her nightdress, is Elizabeth. But this isn't the Elizabeth that anyone at court has ever seen. This isn't the magnificent Queen, with her towering red wig and white porcelain face and elaborate gowns. This is the real Elizabeth, 66 years old, caught completely unprepared without her costume. Her face is bare without the thick layers of Venetian ceruse that she's worn in public for nearly 40 years. Essex can see every scar from the smallpox that nearly killed her in 1562. The pockmarks that crater her cheeks, the wrinkled, damaged skin that years of lead poisoning have turned gray and papery, the deep lines around her mouth and eyes that the white makeup usually conceals. Her lips without their red paint are thin and pale. But what shocks Essex most profoundly is her head. No towering red wig decorated with jewels, no elaborate curls framing her face. Just her real hair or what's left of it. Contemporary accounts describe it in devastating detail. Wisps of thinning gray hair hanging about her ears. That's it. Most of her scalp is completely bald, exposed, the skin visible through the few remaining strands. This is the secret that Elizabeth has protected with absolute ruthlessness for 4 decades. This is what Dr. Hughes saw in 1566 that made him go pale and shake. This is what the Venetian ceruse and the towering wigs and the elaborate ruffs and the structured gowns have all been designed to hide. The Queen of England is nearly bald and has been for most of her reign. Essex stands in the doorway, frozen in shock, staring at this fragile old woman who bears only the slightest resemblance to the magnificent monarch he's known for 10 years. Elizabeth stares back at him, and for just a moment, something like naked fear flashes across her face. She's been caught. The mask has been ripped away. Her most carefully guarded secret has been exposed to one of the most politically connected men in England. For decades, she's controlled exactly who sees her, and when, and under what circumstances. She's maintained absolute power over her image, and in one moment of carelessness, of assuming she was safe in her own bedchamber at 10 in the morning, that control has been shattered. The silence stretches for what feels like an eternity, but is probably only a few seconds. Essex's mouth is slightly open, his eyes wide, his expression a mixture of shock and something that might be pity or horror or both. Elizabeth recovers first because she always recovers first. She's the Queen of England. She survived 41 years on a throne that everyone said a woman couldn't hold, and she's not about to show weakness now, even caught without her wig in front of the man she once favored above all others. She greets Essex calmly, almost warmly, as if nothing unusual has happened. She asks about his journey, listens to his frantic explanations about Ireland, nods sympathetically at his complaints about his enemies at court. She plays the understanding monarch, the gracious queen willing to hear out her loyal servant. Essex, still in shock from what he's just witnessed, stumbles through his explanations. He keeps glancing at her bald head, then forcing himself to look away, then glancing back because he can't quite believe what he's seeing. Elizabeth acts as if she doesn't notice. She tells him sweetly that she'll consider his explanations, that he should clean himself up, and they'll discuss Ireland properly later. Essex backs out of the room, bowing, still stammering his thanks for her patience. The door closes. Elizabeth stands alone in her chamber, and anyone watching her face in that moment would have seen the carefully maintained calm crack for just an instant, replaced by cold, calculating fury. Essex has seen her, really seen her. The one thing she spent 40 years preventing has just happened. As the day progresses, Elizabeth's demeanor toward Essex changes in ways that everyone at court notices, but nobody quite understands. The warm reception of that morning evaporates like morning mist. By afternoon, Essex finds himself denied access to the Queen's presence. By evening, he's under house arrest. Officially, the reason is his unauthorized return from Ireland, his abandonment of his military post, his negotiation of a truce without permission. All valid charges, all true, all worthy of serious punishment. But the speed of Elizabeth's turn against him, the coldness that replaces what had been years of obvious favoritism, suggests something more personal is at play. Essex, confined to his apartments, makes the catastrophic mistake of not staying silent about what he saw. He can't help himself. The image of the bald, elderly woman in that bedchamber is so different from the magnificent queen everyone sees in public that it's almost funny in its stark contrast. He jokes about it to his friends during the weeks of his house arrest. He describes Elizabeth's appearance in mocking terms. He tells people about her crooked carcass, about the wispy gray hair, about how old and diminished she looked without her costume. The words get back to Elizabeth. Of course they do. The court is full of spies and informants, people eager to curry favor by reporting any gossip or scandal. When Elizabeth hears what Essex has been saying about her appearance, about the secret she's protected with absolute ruthlessness for 4 decades, something inside her turns ice cold and final. This isn't just political betrayal. This isn't just a military failure or an unauthorized action. This is personal humiliation. Essex saw her vulnerable, saw her real, saw the aging woman beneath the constructed image of eternal, powerful monarchy. And then he laughed about it. He mocked her. He shared the secret with others. He betrayed not just his queen, but the woman who had genuinely cared for him, who had favored him above other courtiers, who had perhaps even loved him in her own complicated way. The man who saw past her mask chose to ridicule what he found there. Essex would never see Elizabeth privately again. Every request for an audience is denied. Every letter he writes pleading for a chance to explain goes unanswered. He's released from house arrest eventually, but finds himself frozen out of court favor completely. The warmth Elizabeth once showed him is gone, replaced by icy silence that's somehow more frightening than open anger. Essex, desperate and financially ruined by his expensive military campaign, spirals into increasingly erratic behavior. He gathers armed supporters at his London house. He makes wild accusations against Robert Cecil and other counselors, claiming they're manipulating the Queen against him. On February 8, 1601, just 17 months after bursting into Elizabeth's bedchamber, Robert Devereux makes his final fatal mistake. He leads 300 armed supporters in what amounts to a rebellion, marching through London and trying to rally the citizens to his cause against the Queen's evil advisors. The rebellion is a complete failure. London's citizens don't join him. The city gates are shut against him. By nightfall, he's trapped, and by the next morning, he's arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The trial for treason is swift and inevitable. Essex is found guilty. The sentence is execution. On February 25, 1601, Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, formerly the Queen's favorite, is led to the executioner's block on Tower Green. He's 33 years old. He makes a final speech accepting responsibility for his rebellion, asking God's forgiveness for his sins against his sovereign. He kneels at the block. The executioner swings the axe. It takes 3 strokes to sever Essex's head from his body. When Elizabeth is informed of the execution, witnesses report that she shows no emotion at all. No tears, no regret, no sign that she's just ordered the death of a man she once favored so obviously that the entire court gossiped about it. She simply nods and returns to her paperwork as if the matter is of no more importance than approving a minor trade agreement. But here's the question that has haunted historians for over 400 years. Did Essex really die for treason and rebellion? Or did he die for something far more personal? Officially, the execution was about his armed march through London, his gathering of supporters, his attempt to force his way back into royal favor through intimidation. All of that is documented, all of that is treasonous, all of that merited death under Tudor law. But the timing, the personal fury that Elizabeth displayed toward Essex after that bedroom incident, the fact that she never forgave him despite years of previous devotion, suggests something else was at play. Essex didn't just betray his queen politically, he saw her secret and then mocked it. He stripped away the illusion that Elizabeth had spent 4 decades constructing and maintaining at enormous personal cost. He saw the bald head beneath the wig, the scarred face beneath the makeup, the aging woman beneath the costume of eternal majesty. And then he had the audacity to laugh about it, to share what he'd seen with others, to make jokes about her crooked carcass, as if the most powerful woman in England was just a subject for his amusement. For Elizabeth, that was unforgivable. She'd executed people before for political reasons, for genuine plots against her life, for Catholic conspiracies that threatened her throne. But Essex's execution feels different. More personal, more about protecting the image she'd created than protecting the kingdom. Elizabeth's entire reign was built on maintaining an illusion. She was the Virgin Queen, married to England, eternally youthful and powerful. She was Gloriana, the magnificent monarch who transcended the limitations of her gender. She was the symbolic embodiment of England itself, unchanging and eternal. The elaborate wigs, the white makeup, the structured gowns, the absolute control over who saw her and when, all of it was designed to maintain that image. Essex shattered it in one unguarded moment on a September morning. He saw past the costume, past the mask, past the legend. He found an aging woman with a bald head and scarred skin, and he couldn't keep that revelation to himself. Perhaps that's why his head had to roll. Not because he marched through London with armed supporters, but because he committed the ultimate crime of seeing Elizabeth I as she truly was, and then refusing to stay silent about it. The execution wasn't just about punishing rebellion. It was about eliminating the one person who knew the secret and had proven he couldn't be trusted to keep it. After Essex's death, Elizabeth lived 2 more years, dying in March 1603 at the age of 69. In those final years, she became even more obsessive about her appearance, even as her body was clearly failing. The wigs got taller, the makeup got thicker, the control over access to her person got more absolute. She was holding on to the illusion with everything she had left, knowing that the moment she died, that illusion would end forever. And when death finally came, Elizabeth took one last desperate measure to protect her secret. She explicitly ordered that no one was to examine her body after death. No autopsy, no medical examination, no documentation of any kind. Within hours of her death, her corpse was sealed in a lead coffin, soldered shut before anyone outside her innermost circle could see what the removal of her costume revealed. The servants who prepared her body were scattered across England with generous pensions and dire warnings. The physicians who attended her final illness died mysteriously within a year. and her tomb at Westminster Abbey has remained sealed for over 400 years, denied every request for examination, even with modern technology that could scan through the coffin without opening it. What are they still protecting after 4 centuries? What secret lies in that sealed coffin that the British establishment has guarded so zealously? The answer is probably simpler and sadder than conspiracy theories about gender switching or mysterious conditions. Elizabeth was bald. She lost most of her hair to smallpox in 1562 when she was 29 years old, and she spent the next 41 years hiding it, because in Tudor England, hair was a crucial marker of femininity, youth, and vitality. A bald woman was considered unnatural, possibly cursed, certainly unfit to inspire the loyalty and devotion that a monarch required. Elizabeth understood that her power rested partly on her image, that the Virgin Queen needed to look eternally youthful and magnificent to maintain the mystique that kept her kingdom stable. So she constructed an elaborate illusion using wigs and makeup and clothing, and she protected that illusion with ruthless determination. Anyone who saw too much, anyone who couldn't be trusted to stay silent, anyone who mocked what they discovered, paid the ultimate price. Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, learned that lesson the hardest way possible. He saw the real Elizabeth, the woman beneath the costume, and he made the fatal mistake of thinking he could joke about it. 17 months later, his head was on a chopping block. The secret that Elizabeth protected wasn't about treachery or conspiracy or mysterious medical conditions. It was about vanity and power and the terrible burden of maintaining an image that everyone believes in, but nobody is allowed to see behind. And when she died, she made sure that secret would be buried with her, sealed in lead, protected by centuries of tradition and official denials. The tomb remains closed, the illusion remains intact, and Elizabeth's secret, purchased at the cost of toxic makeup and Robert Devereux's life, stays hidden in Westminster Abbey where no one can expose the truth about the Virgin Queen's bald head. If this story revealed something about history you never knew before, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now because we're digging up the secrets that changed everything. The moments that got people killed, and the truths that powerful people spent centuries trying to hide. Hit that like button if you think Westminster Abbey should finally open Elizabeth's tomb after 400 years and let science solve this mystery once and for all. And drop your theory in the comments below. Do you think Essex really died for treason, or was he executed for seeing Elizabeth without her wig and then having the audacity to mock her? Your insights could reveal something historians have been arguing about for centuries. The truth about what really happened that September morning is still out there, waiting to be uncovered.